Here we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing radical expressions. And to begin with, let's just simplify the square root of 75. You're going to rewrite 75 as a product of two numbers. One of those numbers you want it to be the largest perfect square in 75, which means you could rewrite 75 as 25 times 3. You can now rewrite this as the square root of 25 times the square root of 3, and the square root of 25 is 5. 3 is not a perfect square, so it stays under the radical. So square root of 75, or radical 75, simplifies to 5 square root of 3. The next radical is square root of x to the 8th times y to the 5th. This can be rewritten as the square root of x to the 8th times the square root of y to the 5th. Now when you're simplifying the square root of x to the 8th, this is a square root, so we're looking for groups of 2. So how many groups of 2 are there in x to the 8th? Well, our radical is a root of 2, even though we don't see that root. So just take the 2 and divide it into 8, which is 4 times. So the square root of x to the 8th simplifies to x to the 4th. Now when we look at the square root of y to the 5th, how many groups of 2 are in 5? Well, 2 goes into 5 2 times, so you'll have y to the 2nd on the outside, but there's a remainder of 1, and that remainder will stay underneath the radical. Now here we're going to multiply two radicals. Here we have radical 5x times radical 10x. You can rewrite this as one single product, which will be square root of 50x squared. Now 50, what is the largest perfect square in 50? Well, that's 25. So 50 really is 25 times 2. So the square root of 25 is 5. So that 5 goes on the outside. The 2 is left over, so it's going to stay underneath the radical. Now what about the square root of x squared? Well, 2 goes into 2 one time, so one of the x's comes out. So that product simplifies to 5x times radical 2. Here's another example. Here you can take the 3 times the 5, which is 15. Those two numbers are outside of the radical, so you can multiply them together. Then underneath the radical, you can't simplify radical 15, and you can't simplify radical 6. So 15 and the 6 are both underneath the radicals. You can multiply those together. 15 times 6 is 90. Now looking at 90, what is the largest perfect square in 90? Well, that's going to be 9. So we can look at 90 as 9 times 10. So the 15 stays outside of the radical. What's the square root of 9? Well, that's 3, so that 3 is going to come out and multiply the 15. The 10 is not a perfect square, so it stays underneath the radical. 15 times 3 is 45, and then we have times radical 10. Here's a division. Here we have square root of 45x over 16y to the 4th. That can be split into a radical in the numerator, so you'll have the square root of 45x over square root of 16y to the 4th. All right, now 45. What's the largest perfect square in 45? Well, that's going to be 9. 45 is 9 times 5. So square root of 9 is 3, so the 3 comes out. The 5 is going to stay underneath the radical, and the x is going to stay underneath the radical. That is not a perfect square at all. There's only one x. The denominator, square root of 16 is 4. Square root of y to the 4th will be y to the 2nd. And this cannot be simplified in any way, so we're done.